When my husband passed, I moved in with my son. Not out of desperation, but out of love. I cooked, I cleaned, I kept the house warm. For 5 years, I poured myself into their home like it was my own. Then came his new wife. Pretty, polite, calculated. At first, I thought we'd learn each other's rhythms, but weeks turned into tensions, and tension into silence. And one morning, my own son looked me in the eye and said, "Mom, I think it's best if you move out. She needs her space." I moved out, all right. But I didn't go alone. I took everything I had brought into that house because he never realized it all belonged to me. My name is Lillian Ray Carter, and I raised my son Matthew in a 2-bedroom house on the south side of Lakemont. I wasn't wealthy. I was resourceful. I grew tomatoes in the backyard, made dresses from scratch, and worked 2 jobs for years, one at the diner, one cleaning offices, just so Matthew could have shoes that fit and books that smelled new. His father passed away early. Heart failure. At 42. It left us both quiet for a long time. But Matthew was a good boy, polite, focused. He helped around the house, worked part-time through high school, and got into a local university. When he graduated with a degree in computer systems, I clapped louder than anyone in the auditorium. Not because I didn't believe in him, but because I had seen every late night, every exam, every bowl of ramen we split during tuition season. After college, Matthew bought a house, small but clean, solid. He called it his foundation. I cried the first night I stepped into it, not because it was grand, but because it was his. 3 years later, I slipped on a patch of ice outside. The market broke my hip. The recovery was long, the house too quiet, and the bills too high. Matthew insisted I move in. "It's just us," he said. "It makes sense. You helped me. Let me help you." So I moved in. Not empty-handed, mind you. I brought my bedroom set, oak, solid, the kind you don't find in stores anymore, my full china cabinet passed down from my mother, the sewing machine, the heirloom silver, even the leather armchair Matthew used to curl up in as a boy. But I also brought more subtle things, home-cooked meals, warm socks folded neatly in his drawers, soft lights left on when he worked late, the heartbeat of home. Then, 5 years in, Matthew met Alyssa. She was sweet, at first. She called me Miss Lillian, always smiling just a little too wide. They married within 8 months, small ceremony. She moved in 2 days later. And that's when things changed. It wasn't overnight. It started with rearranged cabinets, things going missing, small jokes made under breath. Then came the looks, the sighs, the silence at dinner, and slowly my presence became inconvenient. Then came the moment that changed everything. "Mom, Alyssa, and I have talked," Matthew said one morning, "and we think it's time you got your own place. She needs more space." I stared at him. My son, in his house, furnished with my life. I didn't yell, didn't cry. I just looked at my son, the same boy who once clung to my apron strings when thunder shook the windows, and realized I didn't recognize him anymore. He stood there, wringing his hands, eyes cast slightly down. Alyssa hovered in the hallway, pretending not to listen, but her ears were tuned like a fox. She wore that smug little smile, the kind that comes from getting exactly what you want without ever having to say the words out loud. "I understand," I said simply. He blinked. "You do?" "I do," I replied. "Everyone needs space." I didn't say what I was thinking, that the space she needed was the absence of gratitude, and that my presence reminded her of a love she couldn't compete with. He offered to help me find a place, said he'd cover a few months until I got settled. Imagine that, offering charity to the woman who had paid his tuition, who had scrubbed floors to buy his first computer, who had brought every piece of furniture in this house down to the rug under our feet. But I nodded, and I started packing. Not in boxes, not in sorrow, but with precision. Every dish, every towel, every photograph, the sewing machine, the armchair, the china cabinet, even the curtains. I took it all, because it was all mine. He watched, confused, but didn't stop me. When I wheeled out the armoire, Alyssa finally broke her silence. "Is that really necessary?" I paused, looked her in the eye. "More than you'll ever know." And then I left, with a moving van, not a suitcase. The house looked hollow, behind me, but not as hollow as it would feel once she realized that the warmth, the history, the heartbeat had all been me. The silence from Matthew lasted 3 days. No calls, no texts, no surprise visits. I suppose he expected me to beg, to plead my way back in, or perhaps to feel ashamed for leaving with what he thought were just things. But what he didn't realize was that I hadn't taken the furniture. I had taken roots. Meanwhile, the house, once warm, once familiar, was now stripped of comfort. Alyssa's minimalist style took over quickly. Cold walls, glass tables, stiff decor that looked like it belonged in a hotel, not a home. I heard from a neighbor that she'd started ordering takeout every night, said she didn't have time for old-fashioned cooking. She certainly didn't have time to learn how the boiler worked, or that the circuit in the back hallway tripped if the microwave and dryer ran at the same time. Those were the quiet things I'd managed without fanfare for 5 years. On the 4th day, I got a message from Matthew. "Hey, Mom, just wondering, did you take the mattress from the guest room? Alyssa's parents are visiting, and there's nowhere for them to sleep." I didn't respond, because yes, I had taken the mattress. I'd bought it after my hip surgery when sleeping on the old pullout had left me stiff and aching. It had cost more than a month of groceries back then, but I paid in full. Just like I did with the dining table, and the washer, and the recliner that now sat in my new little sunlit apartment, humming with peace. Another message came the next day. "The oven isn't working. You didn't happen to take the user manual, did you?" Still, I said nothing. Let them learn. Let the silence teach. It wasn't about being petty. It was about letting the absence speak. Letting them sit with the echo of what I had truly provided. Not just furniture, but foundation. By the end of the week, I heard the real blow had landed. Alyssa had walked out, packed a single bag, told him she wasn't built for this, said the house didn't feel like home anymore. Of course it didn't, because I had been the one making it feel that way all along. After Alyssa left, Matthew called me. His voice wasn't sharp or proud. It was small, hesitant, the voice of a boy who'd touched a hot stove and didn't know how to make the sting go away. "Mom," he said, "can we talk?" I agreed. He came by the next afternoon, standing awkwardly in the doorway of my new apartment, a modest place filled with familiar things. The same curtains he grew up under, the same recliner where he'd watched Saturday morning cartoons. The faint smell of cinnamon and something simmering on the stove. "Smells like home," he murmured. He sat down, looked around, and for a moment said nothing. Just took it all in, the warmth, the quiet, the history. "I didn't realize," he said finally, "how much of that house was you." I didn't speak. I let him sit in the realization. He ran his hand along the armrest of the chair. "She said it didn't feel right after you left, cold. She said I'd chased the heart out of the house. I thought she was just upset." "She was right," I said gently. His eyes met mine, red-rimmed, tired. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Everything was yours?" I paused, choosing my words. Because it wasn't about what was mine. It was about what I chose to give, freely, willingly, out of love. I didn't need you to owe me. I needed you to see me. He nodded, slowly, the weight of that truth settling in. "You gave her space," he said, "but I didn't give you any." You didn't give me respect, I corrected, not with malice, but with clarity. He swallowed. I thought I was doing the right thing, being a husband first. There's no shame in being a husband, I said, but you forgot how to be a son. The silence between us was long but not heavy. It was honest. He leaned back, eyes closed for a moment. I miss her, but I think I miss you more. I smiled faintly. You miss the version of me that made things easy. But the woman sitting here, she isn't here to make things convenient. She's here to be seen, and she's done disappearing into the background. He didn't argue. He just nodded. I'd like to start over, he said. And for the first time, I believed he meant it. Matthew began visiting every Sunday. No binder, no wife, no excuses. Just him, 2 hands carrying groceries or flowers. Sometimes nothing at all, but his time. The first few visits were quiet. He'd help with dishes. We'd talk about the news. Sometimes we'd just sit in silence, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Eventually, he started asking questions. How did you afford all that furniture? How did you learn to manage so much on your own? Did Dad teach you that, or was it all you? I answered honestly. Some of it I learned the hard way. Most of it I learned because I had to, because no one else was going to carry it if I didn't. He listened, really listened. That was new. One Sunday, as he stood in the kitchen slicing apples the way I taught him, he asked, Do you think I'm like her? He didn't have to say Alyssa's name. I shook my head. No, but you became like the part of her that sees everything as temporary. She didn't understand the roots. She only knew convenience. Matthew nodded, lips tight. I let her voice get louder than yours. No, I said gently. You turned mine down on your own. He didn't argue. He accepted it. And with that acceptance came something else. Effort. He started offering help without assumption. He'd fix what needed fixing, but only after asking. He started asking me how to cook again. Old recipes, not the quick ones, but the kind that take time and memory. One Sunday, he brought a photo album, our old one, from the Lakemont house. Dog-eared pages, glue cracking, captions written in my neat cursive. He placed it on the table between us and said, I want to go through it with you, from the beginning. We did, page by page. He asked about people he barely remembered, places he'd forgotten, moments he never knew had mattered. And for the first time in years, I saw not just my son, but the boy I raised. The one who had once trusted my every word, the one who used to bring me dandelions in a sweaty fist, proud as a king. That night, as he prepared to leave, he paused at the door. I've been thinking, he said. That guest room, it's empty now, but if you ever wanted to come back. I held up a hand. Matthew, I'm happy where I am, he nodded. I know. I just wanted you to hear it from me this time. I smiled. I did, loud and clear. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was a beginning again. And this time, the respect came first. A few months passed with peace between us, the kind that doesn't come quickly, but grows steadily like ivy creeping back over a wall that had been stripped bare. I didn't expect things to be perfect, and I didn't need them to be. What I did need, what I quietly required, was consistency, not apology. And to his credit, Matthew kept showing up. Each Sunday, each phone call, each quiet gesture wasn't grand, but it was sincere. Then without warning, the stillness broke. It started with a letter, the kind that comes folded 3 times in a cream envelope with no return address, cold language dressed in formality. It was from Alyssa. She was filing for divorce. According to Matthew, she had already moved states, staying with her sister, and claimed emotional instability in the home post-marriage. He handed me the letter without saying a word, letting it sit between us like a heavy object too fragile to touch. I read it quietly, carefully, and placed it back in its envelope. I didn't need to say, "I told you so." The paper said it for me. But that letter did more than confirm her departure. It opened a door Matthew had been afraid to walk through. He began talking more openly, not just about her, but about the way he'd felt during those first years of marriage. He said he'd felt stuck between loyalty and expectation, unsure of which voice to listen to. His mother's, who had built his world, or his wife's, who had started to redraw it. "She wanted me to forget the past," he said once, eyes low. "But it turns out the past is what keeps you grounded. I just didn't see it soon enough." I didn't offer comfort. I didn't need to. What he needed was space to reckon with. His own choices. And in that space, something remarkable began to happen. He started rebuilding, not just our relationship, but himself. He invited me to speak to his colleagues during a leadership seminar on managing family expectations. He started volunteering at a local food bank on my recommendation. He even called my old friend Eileen, the one who helped me after my fall, just to say thank you for being there when he wasn't. And then came the part I didn't expect. One afternoon, he showed up with a folder of documents and a nervous smile. "I want to transfer partial ownership of the house to you," he said. "It's not out of guilt. It's because I understand now. You never needed a place in that house, but you've always deserved a place in the legacy." I didn't need it, but I accepted it, not for the property, but for the principle, because that offer wasn't about real estate. It was about recognition, about ownership of story, of contribution, of quiet presence that held the walls together long before anyone noticed. Still, life has a way of testing new peace, and that test came not through Matthew, but through a family gathering. A cousin's birthday brought extended relatives into one space, some who hadn't seen me in years, and most who had heard twisted versions of my story. Whispers reached my ears before dessert was served. "She took everything with her. No. Poor Matthew lost his wife and his house." I smiled through it all, not out of politeness, but out of power. Because when you've lived long enough with your story denied, the real triumph is not shouting your truth. It's standing, firm in it. And Matthew, bless him, heard the whispers too. He stood up, raised a glass, and said, "Before we go, I just want to thank the woman who taught me what it really means to build a home, not just fill one." That silence after his words was the kind of silence I had waited a lifetime for. Not because it was loud, but because it was earned. After that family gathering, something shifted permanently, not just in Matthew, but in me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to prove myself in my own story. I had always known what I'd done, what I'd built, what I'd sacrificed. But hearing my son say it aloud, in front of the same people who once pitied me or passed judgment in whispers, rewrote the air between us. It gave me peace. But more than that, it gave me closure. From that day forward, I stopped worrying about who believed what. I no longer needed to explain how much of that house was mine, or how many quiet meals, stitched curtains, or mortgage payments had my name in their roots. I had lived it. He had seen it. That was enough. Still, life has its way of circling us, back to the places we left behind. And so, one morning in early spring, Matthew called to ask if I would come to the house, not to stay, not to move back in, but just to visit. "It doesn't feel right without your touch," he said. "And I want to make it feel like home again." I agreed. With a slight ache in my chest, I walked through that doorway and into the house I once filled with warmth, smells of cinnamon and slow-cooked beans, Sunday night soup, and humming lullabies. Everything was still in its place, or nearly. The furniture was different, but the bones were the same. The light still streamed through the same window at mid-morning, casting those golden lines across the hardwood floors where Matthew had once played with his toy cars. He led me through the Rooms, asking what I would change, what he could add, what he could bring back. He asked me about the curtains I used to hang, the fabric I preferred for the cushions, the way I folded the linens in thirds instead of halves so they fit perfectly in the hallway cabinet. It was tender, almost reverent the way he asked. Like a man seeking to understand an old song by learning each note again. We spent the afternoon reorganizing the kitchen cabinets, the ones Alyssa had once rearranged in her first month there. I didn't say it, but he must have known. I was restoring more than a pantry. I was bringing back rhythm. He made tea in the same kettle I'd once used, now brought from my apartment as a gift to him. We sat at the table, where his father's elbows had once rested, where report cards were opened, where so many diners had ended with laughter or quiet reflection. "You know," he said gently, "I was scared of becoming someone who forgot where he came from." I looked at him and said, "You didn't forget. You just had to remember on your own." The next week, he showed up at my apartment with a surprise, a framed print of our original house in Lakemont, painted in watercolor. Below it, a small plaque that read, "Built by love, held by grace." He handed it to me and said, "That's your legacy, Mom. Not the furniture, not the walls, but the way you made every place we lived feel like we belonged." I held it in silence, blinking back tears. Because he was right. That was always the point. Not to be needed, but to be known. Not to decorate, but to anchor. That week, I hung the painting in my hallway, right across from the front door, so that every time I left and every time I returned, I would see it and remember. What I gave wasn't small, and it wasn't lost. It was simply waiting to be seen. The day Matthew came to me with an old cardboard box in his arms, I knew something was different again. He said he'd found it in the attic, one of the few things neither of us had touched since I moved out. Dusty, taped at the corners, and marked in my handwriting, "Home, keep." Inside were scraps of our life, a drawing he'd made in kindergarten, a recipe book with flour still caught in the binding, a faded grocery list in my late husband's script, and the small fabric pouch that had held our emergency cash for nearly a decade. Matthew sat on the floor, cross-legged like he used to as a boy, going through each piece slowly, like he was trying to read history through the fingerprints. "I never knew you kept all this," he whispered. "You were busy growing up," I said with a soft smile. "It wasn't your job to notice what I carried." His eyes filled, not with guilt this time, but something gentler. Reverence. "I want to be the kind of man who sees the weight his mother carried," he said. "And maybe carry some of it back, even if it's late." I reached out and rested my hand over his. "You don't need to carry the old weight," I said. "You just need to know that it was never light." That box became more than a memory. It became a bridge. The next few Sundays weren't just about tea and talk, they became restoration sessions. Rebuilding not furniture, not structure, but trust. He asked about his father, about my fears when I was raising him alone, about the nights I stayed awake counting bills, the recipes I stretched with onions and rice just to keep food on the table. These were questions he never thought to ask before, not because he didn't care, but because he didn't know how much there was beneath the surface of his own story. And I answered them, not to make him feel sorry, but to make him aware. There's a difference. One builds guilt, the other builds respect, and it was respect that now defined us. One evening, as we closed the box and slid it carefully into his hallway closet, not to be forgotten, but to be kept, Matthew turned to me and said, "You didn't just raise me, you raised my understanding of what love actually looks like." I said nothing, just held that moment like I had held so many others, quietly. Because some victories don't need parades, they just need to be felt. There's something sacred about being misunderstood for so long, only to finally be seen without having to explain yourself. I didn't set out to prove anything when I left that house with everything I had brought. I wasn't trying to teach a lesson. I was preserving my worth. But life, in its quiet and steady way, let the truth surface. Not through confrontation or noise, but through the slow return of my son's understanding. What was once a relationship, built on assumption and convenience, slowly grew into something stronger. Respect, earned not through demands, but through presence. I've always believed that motherhood isn't about control. It's about shaping hearts that one day learn to beat with their own wisdom. Matthew's heart finally began to beat that way, not out of shame, but out of recognition. And in that recognition, I found healing. The kind that doesn't need apologies carved in stone, but gestures stitched into everyday life. We found our way back, not to how things used to be, but to something better. Grounded in truth, balanced in love, and lifted by the dignity I never once demanded, but finally received. I still live in my own place, surrounded by my things, my rhythm, my peace. But now, when my son visits, he doesn't see a woman in need. He sees the foundation he stands on. And when he leaves, he says, "I love you," with the kind of voice that knows what that love has cost. I don't need to take anything with me anymore. Because now, what I carry, carries me. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs reminding that quiet strength always finds its voice. Maybe you've been dismissed, overlooked, or treated as if your worth was conditional. If so, know this. Your value isn't defined by who notices, but by what you've built when no one was watching. Leave a comment with your moment of being truly seen, or tell us how you held your ground with grace. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this one, where truth unfolds not with noise, but with dignity. Because quiet strength, that's where the real power lies.